of discussion at that meeting, and it was a great meeting. So it's good to be back here to present some of these results. I know a few people in the room have seen them, but for other people, it's relatively new. I'll get going here. So a big topic of the discussion was how much mature forests are enough? How much do we need? Because we've got a concern in New Brunswick at that time that the percent mature forest, and I should define what I'm talking about in this talk, because the terms again, old forest, old growth forest, mature forest, we really had to use the terms that are mapped in some cases, especially when you're talking about landscape level change. We don't have a very good map of old forest, let alone old growth forest in New Brunswick. So we had to use the term mature forest in a lot of discussion today I'll talk about. But towards the end, I'll relate that back to some of those old forest or old growth forest attributes that are in the stands. So mature forest is defined as forest over 60 years, which everyone will say, oh, that's not an old forest. But when you look at the forest inventory and actually go out on the ground, a lot of cases, tolerant hardwood was said to be mature forest, not the over mature forest, which was the other category, which was older. So we really had to use those terms. Now you can see that that last graph which came out was from, was from the guidelines for forest management here were wrote in 2005 by Matt Betts and Grant Forbes, which we had an article in. And it was really looking at the amount of forest that was dropping on the landscape, the old mature forest, and how it was going below a threshold of 40%, and possibly leading to the extinction of species that depend on old forest. So that leads me to my study area down near Fundy National Park, where other flying squirrel work had happened before, and it found a relationship between the presence of lower amounts of mature forest on the landscape and less ability to trap flying squirrels in those areas. So there's some indication there was a connection there. But as you know, presence, absence of a species is not always a good indicator of how that species is doing on the landscape. So we really wanted to know more information about flying squirrels in this type of habitat. So at Fundy National Park, you have a wide variety of habitats. You have the old growth forest on the Fundy coast, of which Ben Phillips here had found a very old, 450-year-old red spruce, so very old trees. But up in the highlands, you have a mix of some of those coniferous trees with the tolerant hardwoods. And those tolerant hardwoods, especially up in the Caledonian Highlands, were disappearing quite quickly as I was doing the study. So the question really came down to, okay, well, in that landscape, how do we determine whether we have enough mature forest? Because we really have to do something soon. And rather than looking just at the amount, you have to think about, well, what do species need? What do species require? If there's a threshold of 40%, it reflects something that the species can now, these patches have fallen down too small, become too small for some animals to be able to use. And that relates to the species itself and how it sees the landscape. So if you compare one landscape map with mature forest, does the species see that? Or do they see this? How it moves through the landscape, how it obtains food, forage, what the predation risk is, really changes based on those two representations of the landscape. If they're in the blue patches, are they able to use the surrounding landscape? Can they travel between those patches? These are all questions that we had, and we wanted to look at one particular species, the northern flying squirrel, to see how well it lived in those types of landscapes. And what did it need? In those small patches, are we finding less of those flying squirrels? Are we finding a lower survival of those flying squirrels in those patches? What's the relationship? So why flying squirrels? Well, Pacific Northwest or the West Coast was mentioned a little while ago with old growth forest, and certainly there's a link there with the spotted owl. They have lots of old growth forest, and the northern flying squirrel was one of those species that was a flagship species that was put into that mix. We don't have similar type of forest here in terms of the grandiose Douglas fir and other species out there, but we do have older forest, and it seemed like a good one to select, and there's some indication, as I said before, with Louise Ritchie's work that was done earlier. So there's a number of life history characteristics that we feel made it more sensitive to landscape fragmentation. So those are poor movement ability. Well, you could say great movement ability. It doesn't fly. Obviously, it glides. It doesn't take off from the ground. It needs to be up high in a tree, and the higher the tree is, and the more complex that canopy is, they're able to do some pretty amazing glides up to 60 meters, especially down a hill. They can get some really good distance. They can bank turns, evade the predators that they're most concerned with, which are owls and other creatures during the day they usually hide from, so they're only active at night. So really, the gliding distance in that tall trees seem to be a good indication that in clear cuts, you probably wouldn't find too many of them. In very young forests, it's hard to glide. Now, if you have a situation where there's an opening or a gap, what happens to a flying squirrel when it encounters a roadway or a clear cut? Those are some of the questions we had. They have a relatively low reproductive output, and it was said in the literature to be about 2 young per year. So they may be more sensitive to fragmentation. And they're associated with mature forests in lots of ways. In shelter, they're secondary cavity nesters, meaning that they often use woodpecker holes for shelter. They can live in stick nests, and I'll show some of the different nests here in a little while. But they really are associated with older forest attributes in terms of snags and decaying and dying wood. I'll mention a little bit more about the specialized diet too, because they rely on the decaying wood and eat a lot of mushrooms from those woods also. They also have a relatively large home range for their size, so they wouldn't do well in a small patch. So here's some pictures of gliding flying squirrels. It's not often that you see them gliding because during the night it's pretty hard to pick them out. But when we release them from the traps, often you get a good view of that gliding behavior with the patagium, which is the flap of skin held tight. They'll go right to the top of the tree and glide pretty quickly to get away from you. If they're on the ground, they hop maybe once or twice to get onto a tree and then take off. They definitely don't spend much time on the ground if they can help it. And you can see at the very beginning of the glide, it's steep. They're accumulating the velocity, and then they'll start banking and velocity turning to detect their tree. And as I mentioned before, they're trying to escape these guys, which are owls. Different owls on the landscape would probably target some of the areas that flying squirrels are. And then you have pine marten, which are always active looking for where they're hanging out. This picture I took actually on a flying squirrel grid, and we'd often find pine marten in some of the places we're trapping for flying squirrels. They'd be climbing into the traps, and I guess they like peanut butter as well. So some of the snags we found in some of the patches that we were at, a lot of old forest relics. I wouldn't say that all the stands were old growth, but they certainly were mature, and they had a lot of interesting snags and different characteristics that you'd find in older forests. And a lot of that was also on the lichens and mushrooms you saw on the trees. Certainly old beech especially, really gnarled, lots of mushrooms coming off them. We trap in the fall, see a lot of fall oyster mushrooms, which we saw on our trip yesterday. And one day you see them like this, the next day they'd be chewed. And you know that the flying squirrels were eating them. They also use a lot of the mushrooms under the ground. So truffles were one thing that I didn't know a lot about when I started out studying flying squirrels, but I had heard about the relationship with flying squirrels. And truffles, unlike this picture where you have a fungi which is fruiting above the ground, hypogeous mushrooms are under the ground, so they have their fruiting body underneath the soil and form this mycorrhizal relationship with the tree roots. Now, without having an animal dig it up and consume it and move it around, the hypogeous mushroom is really trapped. It can't spread its spores. It can't get to other trees where it can form this symbiotic relationship also with trees. So some of the specimens that we have here in the Maritime, I was able to find pretty readily around the base of trees. You see at night little chew areas at the ground, which were different than some of the big holes that flying squirrels make. And then after digging around that area, you'd find a few truffles. So they were sniffing them out. They locate them, probably cache a few of them, and once they consume them, they're spreading them around the forest in their fecal matter. They're already fertilized. They're dropping them below different trees, which help the trees because they have this symbiotic relationship. The mycorrhizal fungi helps the trees to take up nutrients from the soil and water, and the truffle gets the sugars, the carbohydrates from the tree itself. So it's a relationship that mutually benefits them. And I'll just say, underground, there's lots of work that still needs to be done on understanding how complex that is and how trees may even communicate with each other. There's some interesting work there from Samard, what was her name? Suzanne Samard, who's come up with a TED Talk that you might want to check out, which is pretty interesting about trees communicating with each other. So I'll move on now to some of the study that we did, and I will really just skip over some of the work because I want to touch on the points that are relevant to using flying squirrels as an indicator species. We did do some trapping, a lot of trapping in different landscapes. There's a picture of some of the flying squirrel grids that we had set out. They were large. So here's one mature forest patch that we trapped with 80 traps. We trapped for 6 nights, and it was a lot of work. We pre-bait them beforehand and have them tied open so the flying squirrels would find them, get hooked on the peanut butter, and then we'd come back the next day and make sure they're triggered and ready to catch. And here's some of the flying squirrel crew. You might recognize Siobhan, who was part of the crew at that time. She was out for a walk with us yesterday, so we're reminiscing about all the hard work this was, carrying traps around. Didn't lost a few of the people along the way, but once we caught these flying squirrels, they were all ear tagged, and we weighed them, of course, looked to see if they were sexually active, fully scrotal, or abdominal was what we called the males. If the females were lactating, we took note of that. And that was mostly to tell whether they were juveniles or not, because if they're subadults, then we knew they weren't resident animals, and that's important later on. We also radio collared some of the animals on the grid so we can get an idea of their, the area that they used around the patch, and also to find where the flying squirrels were having their natal nests and dens. So we did find some natal nests on some of the patches. So this is some very, very young flying squirrels. So they're just days old. Their eyes aren't even formed. And we tracked some of these nests over time to make sure we knew how they were surviving. And in some cases, we actually did collar a few of the older ones just before they dispersed. So this is flying squirrels that would be more than 6-8 weeks old. So they're getting close to the stage where they're going to leave the nest. I would say nest, den. Some bird people don't like that. So what did we find? Well, after 15,199 trap nights on those 10 grids, some in contiguous forest and some in fragmented. I didn't explain that very well. But we were really comparing the difference between these two landscapes to see if we found lower survival on the fragmented landscape compared with the contiguous landscape. We found quite a few individuals, but still 362 individuals compared to 1,084 times. So we caught a lot of them multiple times. Some of these animals were a bit trap happy. Some of them are trap shy.
Peanut butter.
Yeah, this is peanut butter. One thing to note is we caught a lot of subadults. 73% we distinguished as new young of the year, and that has a big impact on these survival studies. And I'll mention that in a little while, but here we have just the captures per unit effort. So for 100 traps, we're catching about 10 flying squirrels. You see we caught a lot of red squirrels, especially in the grids that were more contiguous. And we've got some northern flying squirrels, and this is, and we've got some chipmunks as well. But over those 4 years, there was quite a difference in abundance based on just captures per unit effort. And there was not that much difference actually between the two landscapes in terms of catch per effort. In fact, it was a little bit higher in captures per effort in the fragmented area. So, talk a little bit what that might mean. Now, apparent survival is from all those marked animals. You have the individual's ear tags. How did they survive over those periods? You see also very large differences in very low survival. I used a robust design here which took into account the animals that we knew weren't native to the grid. We don't expect maybe to catch some of those subadults the next time because they could have dispersed. So there were high levels of animals leaving the grids, and of course when that happens you don't have a chance to catch them again. So that was taken into account with the robust design. But once you have all those individuals that are not available for capture, and you take into account we had 5 grids compared with another 5 in the fragmented, your numbers get very difficult to compare survival between 2 landscapes. So I really had to group them overall, and this is one last paper that I want to publish on this because I think it's very important for people that are considering doing survival work, just how difficult it is to get the numbers. And we're a bit naive at the beginning to think we could get them given the constraints with an animal like flying squirrels, which are quite difficult to catch. But we did see one thing that was interesting. We saw lots of things that were interesting, but there's another thing. It's that the density of flying squirrels seemed to be higher in the smaller patches. So this leads us to think, well, they're using some of the landscape because they seem to be surviving okay, or as best we can detect. But they're concentrated in those areas, and that kind of comes back to this slide here, where they're in one of these patches. They're not nesting or spending as much time out in the matrix, but they are concentrated more in the mature patches and using the surrounding area. And based on some other work that we did in small patches, we could see that. So this green is the mature forest, and you can see them moving during the night, especially the males in search of other females. Okay, thanks. Looking for nesting areas. There's one in contiguous forest as well. See, the males are much higher. So the difference in home range wasn't significant in this study, but you can see there is quite a large difference in males and females. So we did some other work where we did some night tracking. There's a flying squirrel eating a cone, which you don't usually see. And we did some gap crossing experiments. So the gap crossing was really to see if you move them across an open area, we did translocations, what route would they take to come home? So this was their estimated home range here, and we take the flying squirrel, move it across a clear cut, and see which way would it go around or would it cross. And we vary that distance. So in some cases the gap was quite short, and so they could go this way, and it would be quite efficient to go that way and reach home, or they could go around. And the idea is if the predation risk or their perceived risk was low, then you just walk across. If you're at a big highway, do you just walk across the highway, or do you take the overpass? Well, it depends probably on how much traffic, how many lanes of traffic, whether you're kind of scared or whether you're kind of bold, right? If you're a male or female, there might be differences. So we tested this with different flying squirrels across gaps. So we made sure we knew where they were living, their home range, and then we moved them across. So what did we find? Well, we found that detour efficiency, which is really looking at that comparison, how close is it to go home versus how far to go around, was the most important factor. So they were able to somehow, and some of this was exploratory, they'd look around and they'd see, well, it's this far to go around, but it's this short. So I think I'm going to go around. But once that distance, so when the distance was really close, they would actually cross versus going around if it was really far. We didn't put them within their gliding distance, so they would make that decision. But once it got over a really long distance of 335 meters, they definitely were less likely to cross. They would never cross that. They would always go around. So we did even longer translocations. 2 kilometers, moving flying squirrels away from their home, and looked at the probability of them returning home. Because at this long distance, sometimes it was quite difficult for them to come back. And we varied the amount of mature forest, and we also looked at the amount of connectivity between the homing area and where we dropped them off. So in this example, there's higher connectivity in the right versus the left, but the same amount of mature forest. This is something that's confounded, the amount of mature forest and the connectivity. Of course, when things go up in terms of mature forest, you get more connectivity. So we controlled for that in this experiment. And we found, surprisingly, that not mature forest wasn't the strongest predictor, but actually the amount of connectivity. So in this case, the amount of mature forest that connected on the landscape was important for flying squirrels. So we did some other examples of maps where we moved them across the landscape and looked at where they went. I know we're running out of time, so just quickly run through some of the other things that I think are important for flying squirrels as an indicator. And one of them is when we dropped them off at these different places, we noticed where they were staying during the night. So if I took you and dropped you off in New York tomorrow, where would you stay? Where would you find that was a safe place that night? It sounded like that with flying squirrels. They didn't know these patches. They were far away enough from where they were. So we dropped them off, we'd see where their nest sites were. And surprisingly, overall, if you looked at the selection of flying squirrels in their home patches, was roughly natural cavity, which is like a crack, was almost equal to woodpecker and dray, which is a stick nest. And then in the fragmented contiguous landscape, when we did those translocations, it was also pretty similar. So they were finding some drays to stay in. They're staying in some sketchy spots, I thought, that were kind of like, I don't know, you get wet in that one. And there were sometimes, in really strange locations, staying in ground. But really, they rarely stayed in ground nest locations. And this was similar to some of the natal dispersal work that we did. So I'll just say in conclusion that this landscape still has a lot of remnant old forest attributes on the landscape. Things like large trees and even some of these remnant patches. If you looked inside of them, you'd find some old beach, really gnarly beach, where the flying squirrels were finding a place. But this is changing rapidly in this landscape, where you have old forest patches that are now surrounded by plantations and more high-intensive forest. If you read this, it says chipperwood. So a lot of this stuff is going into toilet paper from Irving, and it makes it soft. Or maybe it makes it a little tougher so it stays together, but softwood makes it soft. And in cases where they can't find a place to nest, in this case, the flying squirrel was using a bird nest in a tree. So in the future, as the forest gets more and more intensively used, those remnant old forest patches won't be there. And I can see this when I'm looking back at some of my spots. This is McManus Hill, a protected area just outside of Fundy National Park, was selectively harvested 6 years before, and just recently went back and they removed all the hardwood trees that were left because it's a low quality stand. And that's happening in a lot of the hardwood patches around Fundy now. So in conclusion, there's some information there on gap crossing, which I think is important for designing clear cuts and some of the landscapes. But the landscape connectivity is still important. There was some information on fecundity that I found, which was interesting. I didn't get a chance to talk about that too much. But there was a strong selection for old forest patches on the landscape and old forest structures for shelter. And I think that's an important point, that we can look at how flying squirrels use the landscape, but really when it comes down to it, old forests are important for lots of species, but they're also important for what they are. If we can measure by going to an old forest and saying, well, this is the number of snags that are here, this is the DVH, these are things that are readily apparent. And we know those structures are important for lots of wildlife, and it's easy to measure. So, and they're rapidly disappearing in a lot of the landscape. So if we don't concentrate on those areas and thinking about in the future what's going to happen, they'll be gone, and we'll be in a situation similar to Scandinavia and other spots where they don't have those snags, and they're creating them now by doing girdling around trees and that sort of thing, or putting up nest boxes for flying squirrels. So that's it. Thank you very much for the time, and I know it's probably not any time for questions here.
Darn you.